This is the Resonant Identity, and I'm Terence Waters. Have you ever really thought about understanding where our motivation comes from? How we're able to make decisions that continually bring us joy and ensuring that we're meeting our goals while also aligning them in who we are? You see, up to this point, we've really been talking about a lot of different things in the Resonant Core Framework and the Resonant Identity, helping us understand how to remain active and present in what it is that we do, understanding our cues and our narratives to ensuring that we keep them in check, continually learning more about ourselves and defining who we are, what we stand for, and why, understanding things about ourselves through the vast unknown, our subconscious mind, and the way that our body keeps the score in notifying us of things that we need to be aware of. And then also choosing for ourselves our value virtue system, enacting those through our drives and NVDs, and then understanding what is possible through the Resonance Core Framework by instilling guardrails, understanding our personal boundaries, and understanding really what is possible as we experience resonance and full alignment. And then finally, what we'd also discussed is really understanding motivation at its core, where it comes from, how we're able to sustain it, and being sure that we create our goals in line with our drives and bringing ourselves a widened window of choice as a result, as we start understanding more about our identity systems, understanding more about the world around us, and our personal awareness as we start experiencing life more and more and more. That's a lot to talk about in relation to embodied awareness, identity transformation, resonance, and modular precision, which allows us the ability to select what we want, choose what we want, and leave behind what we don't. But now here comes the question with what we do with it all. Because now we have all of the tools that we need to achieving our SMART goals, to making ourselves the best version of ourselves, and to making sure that our decisions land with maximum impact to helping us get what we want. But how do we keep that going? Because really, we're the ones that are doing all of this work. We are the ones that are continually trying to ensure that we achieve identity transformation, becoming who we want to become, achieving what it is we want to achieve in this world, and making it all happen. Because no one else is holding us responsible and accountable for all of this except ourselves. Yes, we can involve other people. Yes, we can ensure that other people keep us grounded, working with teachers, motivators, mentors, financial analysts, and whoever to ensuring that we meet our goals. And they do help a little bit, but ultimately we are the ones doing the work. We're the ones ensuring that we keep all of this going because it's a lot. It's a lot for us to try to understand how do we make sure that we know what our identity is? How do we make the Resonance Core Framework core values work for us? And because we know that we tend to drop off the bandwagon and things just become more difficult, how do we ensure that we make all this keep going forward? Because motivation is part of it. And yes, we do have our habits and our small wins, but it dies off. Unfortunately, that's just part of life. And so when we're trying to understand part one, which is the self, we now need to understand how we keep all of that going, how we make sure that when we do fall down or when we make mistakes, that we don't get so discouraged that we just stop. How do we make sure that we continually align with our goals, our actions, our identity, and our identity transformation? That's what this episode is about, which is the third core value in part one of the self, called resilient alignment, which is how we hold our identity under pressure, keeping it going and ensuring that we continually make decisions that ensure that we achieve our identity coherence and our identity transformation. Because it all comes from identity alignment and resonance, which are the heart of the Resonance Core Framework and the Resonant Identity. In today's lesson, we talk about resilient alignment and how to make that work. So this episode will borrow from more information that we gathered and talked about in our prior episodes regarding drives, the drive propulsion loop and drive engine, which you will find in chapters 7 and 8 of the Resonance Core Framework book, forthcoming later this fall. We also go a little bit deeper in understanding about small wins, dealing with the activation engine and dopamine as a prediction chemical, understanding further more about how identity collapses under stress and what we can do about it, and also working through intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and ensuring that we use that continuously to keep moving our propulsion system forward. You'll find all this information and details about the sources where we receive this data for our episode, and you'll find that in the show notes and on our website at theresonantidentity.com. So really, now we understand that motivation is really the thing that helps us keep moving forward, especially when we align it in our goals, when we align it in our identity, and we align it through the different drives and the MVDs that we make in terms of our resonance. And we also make sure that we check ourselves, because guardrails are where things stop. We can have resonance that tells us that we want to do all of these different things, shoot towards those stars that we're trying to get to. But our guardrails tell us what is possible and where it stops. Because as soon as we reach that resonant level of making a decision that goes against our ethical and moral values and against the guardrails that we have externally to us, and also those that we adopt, that tells us what's possible versus improbable. And also, if we do cross those lines, it pushes us against who we are, because those guardrails are the things that ensure that we do not overstep our bounds, that we do not make decisions that are improbable, or will not actually land with people in terms of our spheres of influence and the human element, which we'll talk about in part 2. Because now what we need to understand here is that we're moving directly from that place of motivation, and we're now moving into specifically what is called identity mechanics, which is helping us understand here that our identity is the thing that drives us. Our identity is what continually pushes us forward. Our motivation is part of it, sure. We do have those intrinsic motivators and things that push us toward what we want. But the fact is, when those moments of stress occur, when it's just about to all collapse on top of us, when we're having that trouble of trying to say, how do we push forward when the going gets tough? And it seems like everything is going against us, it's identity mechanics and identity alignment through our resonance that make all of this happen, in check with our ethical and moral codes, our drives, and our guardrails as well. So now what we need to do is shift everything that we have learned in the prior episode into identity alignment, rather than just simply modular precision and modularity and motivation. Because what you now need to understand is that in the drive engine, the thing that continually propulses our choices and our decisions forward, we also need to make sure that our identity is aligned with all of that. Because here's the part of it that we need to understand. Extrinsic motivation, as we now know, is coming from external sources. And while it is important to helping us being able to say, how do we achieve what we want, especially when we interface with our world, that only gets us so far, because that extrinsic motivation, it is only short-lived. It doesn't give us that world of what it is we want on a long-term scale. That's where intrinsic motivation comes into play, because the motivation itself is what gets the gears running and how the accelerator starts. But is the propulsion through our identity alignment that says that we want to be intrinsically motivated because it aligns and is rooted in who we are. What that does is ensures that we make more stable decisions. It ensures that we're less state dependent on our external world, because we are the ones that are the only ones making these decisions in line with our identity alignment. And because of that, we're the ones holding ourselves accountable whenever things happen. Whenever we're trying to make sure that we really achieve what it is we want, whether that's different types of goals, SMART goals, self-improvement, whatever the case may be, because it's the same process over and over again. We need to enact MVDs. We need to continually evaluate them through the drive activation loop and drive loops. We need to ensure that our embodied awareness is there and continually in tuned with who we are and our cues and our narratives, and making adjustments as we need to through data-driven decision making. All of that is driven by you, not even me, not your family, not your friends, not even your church, your religion, your politics, anything. This process must be initiated and continually moved by you, which is how we score our decisions, how we check our journaling, checking and validating our guardrails, ensuring that the decisions that we make are data-driven. All of it. Because that's what the Resonance Core Framework is. It requires action, continuous action. not just simply something we do yesterday or the day before. We need to be striving in continuous action, and that has to come from within. You're the only one who can make that happen. And so, how do you do that? Intrinsic motivation, all of it aligned in who you are. Because if you have that intrinsic motivation to wanting to change, wanting to become a better person, improving your self awareness, improving your relationships with other people, matching and reaching your SMART goals, making more SMART goals to getting what you want, all of those things are rooted in your identity alignment, nothing else. And once you have your intrinsic motivation set and root it in who you are and what you stand for, you're more likely to continually make those decisions because they align with who you are, which means that your motivation isn't just simply coming from intrinsic motivation anymore. It's not just simply driven from an internal source. It's driven by your identity. It's driven by you, your resonance, and your identity alignment in line with who you are. And this isn't to say that you need to be perfect 100% of the time either, because we also have to remember we're human. Things get in the way. Our state of being is not the same from day to day. Some days we just don't feel like doing anything at all. Some days we need to rest. Some days we need to prioritize our self-care. Other days we may have lots of energy. It really just depends on how we manage ourselves based on what it is that we want to accomplish. And that requires consistency, which is the key detail here. Because some days you're not going to be at 100%. Some days you're going to miss things. You're going to fail tests. You're going to drop out of your drive engine and your MVDs and your value virtue system. You're going to forget a lot of it. You're going to make mistakes too. There will be just times where you accidentally lash out from a place of reactivity instead of being data-driven. That's life. And you're allowed to give yourself grace for when those moments happen. But as long as you have that internal drive of being intrinsically motivated and rooting it in your identity alignment and your identity coherence, it becomes much easier to restart that drive engine because it's rooted in who you are. So when those moments happen where you're sick or you make mistakes or whatever, it's not an indication of a bad character flaw. It's not an indication that you're any less of a person at all. It just means that you're human. And I wish that I could instill this on so many people that are trying to find their goals, trying to accomplish them, define them, and so on. Because you don't need to shoot for the stars in the very beginning. A goal is a goal. And if it means that you have to start with the smallest little piece of goal in order to be able to make that happen, you do it. You make it so that you're not overwhelming your system. You're keeping your narratives and cues in check. It aligns with who you are and what you want. And it aligns in your guardrails and your boundaries of what it is that you can accomplish. All of that will make it happen, regardless of how big or how small it is. And the thing is, it just naturally feeds on itself because, as we'll go back into the activation engine, as the more you start to accomplish your goals, your body and your mind naturally just start to want to do more because that's just what it does from a neurobiological process. And then it becomes easier to being able to continue in your habits because you see that you've made progress in what it is you've done and where you're going. And so as long as you recognize that resilient alignment coupled with embodied awareness and modular precision, when you take that stance that your identity alignment becomes your priority, that your identity transformation becomes what it is you want, it becomes much easier for you to restart that engine when the moments all of a sudden see that it dies down because they're more rooted in what you want. They're more rooted from an intrinsic motivation, a drive within you that basically says, this is what I want to accomplish. And resilient alignment coupled with those other two core values and resonance are what make it happen. And that is the identity being the reason that your motivation then becomes renewable, not just simply a part of who you are. You're listening to the Resonant Identity with Terence Waters. We'll be right back. This is the Resonant Identity. I'm Terence Waters. Welcome back. So now that we understand that the resilient alignment rooted in our identity and who we are and what we stand for are what keep us going forward, we now are going to take that understanding of what the core value means and now being able to give our past knowledge a little bit more understanding and root, so that way when we want to continually make those decisions and need to restart, we can then use that knowledge from the lens of our resilient alignment in our identity and what we stand for, to making it becomes easier for us to sustain that drive engine. So let's understand first the activation engine. Recall from before that this is simply the way in which our body and our mind decide how it wants to enact our decisions. And it happens with that threshold of energy that's required in order for us to being able to make a decision. Because as we mentioned, our brain actively decides whether or not it wants to enact an action because of that threshold. But if we can continually make very small decisions that entices our mind to produce that dopamine to bring down that threshold, the more that we continually make those decisions, our dopamine then hits stronger, and it makes that threshold of energy much less. Because what it does is, again, our dopamine is the thing that predicts what it is we want to do, evaluating the risks versus the reward. And if it finds that it really wants that reward, it will push that threshold down to making it that our energy is much less to being able to do what we want. And the activation engine, as a result, which is what this all is not just simply about starting our MVDs or the drive system. It's also about restarting sometimes. Because here's the thing, our stress does this. We just have lower energy days. We just have days where we just don't want to. And this has happened to me recently, where all of a sudden I'm looking at all the times that I've been going to gym and how I've been building and what my goals are and what I'm wanting to do. But because I've lost some energy because of needing to do other things, that threshold has gone up. It makes it even harder, even when you're into it 7 or 8 years later, like I have been. So it was really funny going over this episode because I'm realizing I'm literally experiencing this exact same judgment loop and data loop right now. Because the activation engine needs to still be rooted in who you are. It needs to still be rooted in that resilient alignment. And when I recognized that, I then needed to go back a little bit and start enacting some new MVDs. That same rule that I have, which is just 3 moves a day. That gets tricky because, again, it's that consistency that's required for us to continually move forward. Because I've been off the bandwagon for a little while, just only a week, which I call it recovery week, which is fine, right? It's not to say that I'm a failure. It's just to say that I'm human. But the activation engine, once I get that propulsed back forward, and start understanding more of my MVDs, the small wins, the small actions, eventually it restarts that same propulsion system. Because activation energy spikes when we're under stress, when we just don't want to do things, when we're in that threat response cycle, when our energy wells are low, all of it. And what it needs is what's called a predictive cue. It needs that little bit of spark to reminding the brain and ourselves to say, wait a minute, why am I actually doing this in the first place? That small little piece of motivation, which is our intrinsic motivation, sometimes even external if it happens to be something we align with. And we take that and we then say, this is why we're doing what we're doing. Looking at myself in the mirror and taking that weekly check-in and realizing, oh, I've lost a little bit here, but I'm still very much aligned in what it is I want. The nice body, health and wellness, that tighten work so I look a little bit better myself, so I'm more happy in my body. That's just the smallest little piece that we can redefine as part of our journaling and our DII scoring, so that when we fall off the bandwagon, we go back to it, we remind our brain what it's like to be on that wave of making all those decisions aligned with our goals and how good it felt. As long as we remind ourselves of just that small little inkling, then we look into it and run an MVD through a drive loop again, which in my case is that 3 moves a day. That's all it is, something small. If that becomes too much, I make it 1 move a day. What does it matter? As long as I'm doing something, I'm still making aligned decisions through my resilient alignment lens. That's what this core value does. Because the activation engine is how we return to alignment after we've experienced that little setback of collapse. And I wouldn't even just say collapse, I would just simply call it life. Because really, that's all it is. We're human. So why not instead look at it for what it is, which is just a couple of days where I decided not to go to gym, and then get back on the bandwagon and say, this is what I can do to bring myself back, noticing my cues and my narratives as I make these decisions. And if it becomes too much, dial it down. And then from there, once we get that habit forming one more time, it continually repulses and pushes forward the activation engine because the dopamine starts getting much more fired. The brain releases that chemical more and more as it starts understanding that it's actually making us feel good, that it's aligning with who we are. And that identity alignment through identity, understanding, and coherence is what makes it happen. Because remember that dopamine is a prediction chemical. It's the part of our brains that does not simply give us reward for what we've done. It literally predicts that we're going to be receiving rewards, and as a result, it gets released. Because what happens here is identity itself is what is that determinant by which dopamine gets released or not. And when our identity itself collapses or erodes in those moments, so does the dopamine that gets released. And that's why the threshold action gets a little bit more higher for us to make that decision, because the dopamine doesn't fire. And that means that that energy to get back on that hump is a little bit more difficult. That's why when I'm facing that this week, I'm recognizing to myself, hey, this is just normal part of the process. I've been out of the loop for a little while. And yes, the brain is looking at it going, oh, I'm too tired. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if this is something I can work with. But instead, you really can. All you have to do is take that smallest little piece of win and make it happen. And eventually, it restores that natural dopamine prediction. Because still, those memories of what it is you experienced going on and on with the drive loop get stored in the vast unknown of your mind. And yes, they do lie dormant because you're now experiencing those friction points from your past identity, which in my case is, I'm too tired. I don't know if I can do this. I have other things I need to do and so on. But that's just how it works. Your brain and your cues will naturally just start to fire because it then takes from your past identity and shows you that what you're doing now is aligned with it, when really it's not. It's aligning with who you were, not with who you are. And so to get back on that bandwagon, you kind of have to expend a little bit of that energy to make getting over the hump of the threshold to making that happen. But then it becomes much easier because eventually then your brain starts to fire from who you are, from those decisions you made before about what you've done, who you've become, the things that you're excited about. And eventually your brain then says, oh yeah, this is actually why we want to do this. This is aligned with who we are. And so let's fire some of that dopamine because I want to get back to that. I remember what I looked like before. That was then. Now that I'm realizing there's this pump and then I feel better and I have more energy, why wouldn't I want that back? And so it then starts firing that dopamine again as part of its prediction chemical. That's the biological foundation of the resilient alignment, which is recognizing that we're human, which is also recognizing that our brain just doesn't like to expend energy. Again, the homeostasis and the vast unknown and all that. But then when it starts to be reminded of those things as to why we make those decisions, when we do want to get back into alignment, we do so from that resilient alignment lens, recognizing who we are and what we stand for, and making sure that it still remains resonant, while also quieting down our cues and narratives, because those are the things that will naturally try to deter us. And so if we can make those small decisions in line with who we are, it reminds the brain of what it is we're trying to accomplish. And then we can take those small wins, which we'll get to after the break, to ensuring that we keep everything moving forward so that the dopamine prediction gets fired again as part of the brain's activation engine. You're listening to the Resonant Identity with Terence Waters. We'll be right back. This is the Resonant Identity with Terence Waters. Welcome back. Now we need to remind ourselves a little bit about what small wins are and the habit engine, which are the actions we take as part of our resilient alignment, continually move forward by reinforcing who we are through those small actions and making them part of habit as part of prioritization. If we use small wins as an identity propulsion system, not just simply motivation, it becomes easier for us to enact that because we recognize that our small wins and MVDs are part of who we are. Because what small wins do is re-engages the intrinsic motivation. It helps remind us a little bit of what it is we're doing and why, and the motivations that we have internally as to why we're making those small decisions. It builds on itself from everything else we talked about in terms of dopamine as a prediction and also the activation engine, as it then starts to look into how do we get that back moving. What small wins do, those continually small activations of our MVDs in line with our identity, in line with our value virtue system, and guardrailed appropriately, it rebuilds the identity coherence that we have while also influencing and retraining the brain of our true identity coherence. Not what it thinks, but what we know. What it does is it shows our brain we're making decisions in line with who we are today and who we want to become. That drive is what continually rewrites the script of the vast unknown. And it must be repeated multiple times through our journaling practices with what we write down, our DII scores that show us our felt alignment and understanding, our identity and self-reflective processes as we journal that says how can we improve ourselves to ensure that we keep that propulsion engine going, and then how we understand what our choices are in order to be able to improve it. Because eventually our MVDs themselves will be rooted in dissonance over time, especially as we start to transform and do these habits more and more. As my example I told before, eventually I just get to the point where I want to accomplish more. Because yes, I am a person that goes to the gym. So it's not just about 3 moves anymore. It's about sticking to an actual program, writing down what it is I want to do in terms of my actual body goals, and then setting those goals in alignment with what I can accomplish. Whether that's 4 or 5 moves, doing so in the morning, doing the afternoon, making things shorter, bringing in recovery days, or whatever else that I need to do. That's where the continuous understanding happens. Because all of those practices, these micro rituals that we take in the Resonance Core framework, continually recenter us into who we are and ensuring that we make those decisions as alignment. They restart the activation engine and they keep the engine going. It's not just simply a one-time deal. It's a continuous feedback loop, continuous back and forth every single day, starting with our drives, understanding where they're rooted in, making those actions every day that we're able to, going back and taking journal actions, writing down what felt good, what didn't, scoring our decisions according to the DII score and the RCF, and repeating the cycle over and over and over and over again. And all that simply shows us is our identity resilience, our identity that is rooted in who we are, our resilient alignment that says, I'm going to make these decisions no matter what. It's going to be tough. There are going to be moments I don't want to. There are going to be moments I just want to lie in bed. That's normal. Of course, assess yourself, assess your energy, and make adjustments as you need to. Don't feel like you have to be 100% of the time. But the consistency is what will keep you going forward. And eventually those small wins become habits. They become part of who you are. And they become who you want to become and transform you into that person. Because it then teaches your brain, your cues, and everything else that what you are doing essentially is safe. Not just simply who you are, but is safe to perform. It's not going to harm you. It's not meant to be a threat. It's just simply you retraining your body and your mind into who you want to become. And as those align further and further through those actions, it moves you forward. And so really this episode, as you can start to see, just builds on top of one another. It says the exact same thing, just given to you in different ways. But through the small wins, that is the specific way you do it, which is your action, the MVDs that you define in line with your value virtue system, making sure that you do them continuously and reviving them or refining them as you need to through all of your RCF tools. You can now see that this just becomes something as a part of what you do every day. It's not something that takes any rocket science. It's not something that just continuously becomes this hurdle to achieve. Eventually, as you start doing it more and more and more every single day, it becomes second nature. It's not something you have to think about. It's just something you do. That's the coolest part of the resonance core framework. You don't have to think about it once you get to a certain point. It's that initial going up the hill that makes it hard, right? Which is you're thinking, oh, I got to do my journaling again. Oh, what did I score myself, or what did I do yesterday, or what do I need to improve here? Oh my gosh, that was terrible. Why do I need to change this MVD? Why can't this just simply work? You're going to get those issues all the time. And I'm sorry to say it, this is just what happens with life. It doesn't end. Fair warning. I only laugh because the exact same thing happened to me, where you're just continually making these decisions, but you always get those roadblocks, those cues that just start firing. You think about going to gym and you're just like, why? Why can't this just be normal, right? Oh, I'm just so tired today. I really don't feel like I can do this. All of these things, you'll get all of this because, again, for one simple reason, you're human. And that's okay. It's okay if you make mistakes. It's okay if you fall off the bandwagon, if your activation engine just stops for days, weeks, even months at a time. It's not an indication that you are a bad person. Get that thought out of your head right now. Because this is not easy at first. It just takes continuous action, continuous focus, reminder of what it is you're doing in the resonant identity and why you decided to get to this point. Because if you look at it that way, that's your motivator. That's how you keep yourself moving forward. That's how you keep yourself responsible and accountable, by looking at how much you've journaled over the past few weeks, by looking at your average of your DII scores, by feeling your resonance, by exercising your understanding of data-driven decision making, by keeping yourself self-aware every day, understanding what's happening with the world around you and within, looking at everything and ensuring that the decisions that you're making are rooted in who you are, and ensuring that your ethical and moral codes and your guardrails are set appropriately so they stop you from making decisions that are out of line with who you are. That's another important thing, because resonance itself can be great and wonderful and does show full alignment when it's set up that way. But if you make resonant decisions without really checking yourself and who you are, that also makes you aloof. That also seems to be just a self-fulfilling prophecy. I feel resonant, so yes, I know that I can make this decision. Not necessarily. So it's important that you understand those processes, because then what happens is your propulsion continues forward. It just simply is activated every day you do it. Your dopamine naturally brings down your threshold decision processes. Your small wins start to accumulate. Your identity just starts to stabilize. Those cues and narratives just simply fade into the background, because then they realize that they're not a problem. Your intrinsic motivation just becomes part of who you are. You start to see progress in your SMART goals. You start to see that you are changing from the inside out. People notice that there is something different about you. When you start noticing all of these different signs, that's when you know your identity coherence, evolution, and transformation are happening. Because you then start to see the shift in your world, in you, and the people around you. They will ask you what's going differently with you. Even if it isn't anything that's externally shown, they will just notice a shift in who you are. They will notice that there's something different about you. They're all of a sudden going to start to be drawn to you. You're going to notice that you're going to be able to influence a room much more. People will just naturally want to gravitate to you. We'll get into this more when we talk about part 2 and the outward reach, but you then will naturally start to attract people into your life, because an identity coherent life, coupled with all of these tools, continuous actions, continuous focus on the resonant identity and the resonance core framework, all of these things will literally transform you, because it will literally show people that you are making aligned decisions that resonate with other people. And that shared resonance then comes out and starts to portray itself and naturally exude to the people that are around you. And from that position, you're just going to notice so many wonderful new opportunities that just naturally come to you. Again, as long as they are rooted in who you are, that they are limited and checked and double checked through the triad and interpretive hygiene, that you're making decisions that land with people, that are not outlandish, still resonant, but ensuring that they are checked and are driven by who you are. And it is resilient alignment coupled with all of these things that makes that happen. You're listening to the Resonant Identity with Terence Waters. We'll be right back. This is the Resonant Identity, and I'm Terence Waters. Welcome back. So now we need to understand when things happen, when the loop gets broken, when your identity starts to collapse. What do you do in those moments? How do you recognize it? And how do you leverage the powers of resilient alignment to make that happen? Because what's going to happen here is your cues are going to experience issues. You're going to experience stress in life, distractions, issues that take you away from what it is you want to accomplish. Because you now need to understand where those cues and circumstances happen so that you can start to become more aware of them in the moment rather than after, if possible. Because what you'll find, and we'll talk about this in the next episode, which is about stress. Stress is the number one thing that will pull you away from who you are. It just is part of life. And we know this because usually stress is known as a detractor. It is something that we try to get rid of. It is something that we try to avoid because it's uncomfortable. But what you're going to see here is that stress also itself is data. And we'll talk about this more in the next episode. But I want you to first understand what stress tends to do because it comes from a threat response cycle. So remember before with the nervous system and what it does when it detects threat is it naturally processes cues that are sent to the brain, which then causes a lot of information being sent to us to try to fight off the real or perceived threat. And when that happens, that is what is called the volition stage, which is us understanding from a conscious perspective that something is wrong. We then experience tunnel vision. We notice those cues are firing in our bodies and in our emotions. We're starting to feel defensive. We start to get a little bit of guilt or shyness or worry or whatever the case may be. And then your narratives start to match it. You then start worrying about what's going on and thinking that you're a failure. Your judgments start to fire on all processes. The vast unknown then just floods you with all of this information, depending on how bad it gets. And then from there, this is what happens. You notice in your body all of those triggers. Your window of choice becomes compressed. You notice that you want to lash out at people. You're noticing that you experience tightness, shortness of breath, trouble in focusing, all of it. That specific moment is what is called a threshold. That is when you notice consciously that your identity is starting to collapse. That very same moment. Thresholds we'll get to a little bit later. But what is very important to understand is that when you are actually aware that you are in that moment, that is when you need to invoke the resonance test and recenter yourself, your grounding techniques, those moments that bring you back to the present moment, removing yourself from the situation if you need to, but doing the best that you can to remain grounded so that you can make decisions in line with your resilient alignment. That is the key, because this is the moment that tries who you are. And what we need to do is we need to override that potential identity collapse, reroute ourselves in who we are and what we stand for, make data-driven decisions based on interpretive hygiene, the resonance test, and so on, and looking into those ways that we can ensure that we're making those decisions while not succumbing to those thoughts that we've lost our motivation, because it will happen. You'll start to think that you're a failure. You're going to start to experience those narratives. You'll experience those cues that take you away from really, truly understood logical thought. And when that happens, We need to take those steps to not shut them down, accept that they're there, but approach them from groundedness, mindfulness, meditation, slow breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, whatever it is you need to do. Because you have not lost your identity coherence. The key is you have not lost who you are. You have not lost your value virtue system. None of that's happened yet. Because you haven't done anything wrong. Remember that I told you that every single thing you've experienced before you get to that conscious reality is just what your mind and your body are doing. It's embodied awareness instead that is asking you to say, oh, this is happening. Okay, I can now make a decision about what I'm going to do with it. I can slow down. I can recognize that this is just simply my body's natural response. It is not a bad thing, but I recognize that I need to pause. And you do whatever you need to do to ensure that you have a widened window of choice. Because at that point, you're then able to make the right course correction in line with your identity. And that keeps the activation engine going because you're choosing then to say, nope, I'm still going to go to the gym, even though this is causing me stress. Because you chose to see it as something to reroute yourself in identity. But now here's the other part of it. Because again, we're human. Let's be fair here. We screw up. We put up with a lot of bullshit that helps us look at life. And unfortunately, we succumb. We get reactive. We lash out at people we care about. We all of a sudden get emotionally charged. We just shut down. Our anxiety just takes over. We just simply leave the situation and stonewall what's going on. We succumb and decide instead to just go ahead and give into it. It happens. This is life. Sometimes those actions are against who we are. Sometimes they are not our best selves. That's again just because we are limited in what we do as a human. It's our energy levels. It's the way that we perceive life. Sometimes it's from trauma. Sometimes we're just not there at all that day. It happens. This is just life. And I think we need to learn to give ourselves grace and others a lot more. We're dealing with so much stuff. We have so many things that take our attention away from who we want to become. We deal with so many internal strifes and issues, especially when they're rooted in trauma, that I think when we notice that that's happening in ourselves and other people, we need to give other people attunement and empathy and recognizing, hey, I see you're experiencing something here. Calm down a little bit. Let's take it back, right? And I'm really excited once you get into the outward reach, because you're then going to see really how you can take your own internal alignment and help other people. It's pretty awesome. But really, when we look at it this way, we recognize that we all collapse. We all make mistakes. We all just experience this problem, whether or not we're aware of it. And so instead, what we want to do is work through restabilizing who we are and restabilizing ourselves into what it is we need to do to reestablish that alignment loop and reestablish and bring in that activation engine again. And that comes down to what we call the identity stabilization feedback loop. We use a whole ton of loops in the Resonance Core framework. This is another one. And so, yes, you'll want to take notes of this one because this is what helps you get back to what it is you want to do when inevitably the propulsion system ends. Because first, what you want to do is when you notice it, that's about 40% of it, actually, which is a big part. You all of a sudden stopping what is happening in the moment or later and recognizing, wait a minute, I'm not doing what I normally do here before. I've noticed that I've actually not been enacting my MVDs recently. That's a big step that a lot of people don't get to. You'd be surprised. That is a level of embodied awareness that you now have, which is you all of a sudden are showing yourself, wait a minute, I'm missing something here. Oh, I forgot. I didn't do journaling the past 3 days. Wait a minute. I made those decisions. What actually happened there? Those pauses and those pieces of clarity and curiosity get you so far the way, because then you can shift your line of focus into a data-driven decision-making lens and then start to look at it just from curiosity. No judgment, not saying you're a bad person, just looking at it from a curiosity standpoint. Because then that becomes your trigger. We'll get into this more in the data loop as we start talking about that jump. But this one is important for you to understand because it's specifically aligned with resilient alignment. So your trigger for this feedback loop, in this case, it's that pause, that question, that wonder, that curiosity in saying, why aren't I doing these things anymore? That is when you name the collapse, naming specifically what stopped you and what stopped the activation engine. And once you've named it and you've written it down or you have it aware in your system, you then need to regulate the body, which is just our normal standard micro rituals of calming us down, bringing us back to the present moment, meditating, walking around, shifting the focus, whatever the circumstance may be with whatever works for you. Finding a quiet space to really ponder and understand. That is regulating the body through embodied awareness. And from there, that reopens the window of choice. Because then what you decide to do is writing down information that you have gathered through the data-driven decision-making lens. And then you look at the main reason of your identity, your value virtue system, the MVDs and drives that are aligned with them. You're going to revisit those constantly. I recommend writing them down and displaying them on a mirror because I use them all the time. And I even have pencils. So I'll take a pencil next to it so I can erase some of the things I've written and making sure that it is visible and currently up to date as much as possible. Because then what that does is it then reminds you a little bit more, oh, this is why I'm making these decisions. These are my SMART goals. These are the things that I'm trying to envision that I want to become. This is my identity evolution and transformation. Because then what you do is once you recognize what has stopped and what you need to restart, you take those MVDs, those small wins that you've associated within it, and you trigger the activation engine by re-engaging the intrinsic motivation. You first write down why you're doing what you're doing. Where does this get rooted in your identity alignment and your transformation? What is resonant about those MVDs that made you want to start them in the first place? All of that. Because if you write those things down while you're rooted, while understanding a little bit more, and giving yourself grace, that's another big one, by the way. You're not a bad person, so give yourself a little slack here. Look at it and then being able to say, well, okay, this is my MVD. What does it feel like if I were to go ahead and start it over again? Think about it for a minute. Understand what's happening in the body, in the mind, when you start picturing yourself and visualizing what it would look like to reenact that MVD, because that's how you trigger the activation engine again, which is reenacting and reestablishing your MVD system. So if that's the thing you want to restart, you first need to understand in the body and the mind how it feels. So in my case, when I was starting to think about doing an entire workout for a week, it put my mind in just this really bad judgment loop. I was constantly worrying about, I'm not going to have enough time. I'm really tired. I don't have that much energy. It's just going to take too much. Okay, that's your narratives, right? That's the cues that are being fired. That means that my MVD is too big. There's just not a way that I can make that happen if I'm going to constantly be fighting that. So instead, I'm bringing it down. Oh, today, you know what I can do is I can just do 3 moves at home on my leg day, which is I'm going to be doing that right after this podcast, actually, right? But that was a little bit easier for my mind and my narratives to process because they know that I can do it, but they don't want me to be overwhelmed. And because I was feeling that already, I realized I needed to bring it down, getting back into it. Because then once you have reached that process and being able to say, this is what I'm going to do to restart it, you begin it. You immediately enact it through the drive activation system. And once you do, you run that MVD just like you normally do through a drive alignment loop. What happened? How did it feel? What were the cues and narratives that occurred? Were there light cues, shadow cues, whatever? Are there ways you could refine that MVD to make it better? And it sounds like a lot to where you're all of a sudden looking, I got to do all of this all over again. Yeah, I hate to tell you this, but yes. And here's why. Because we have to remember that our MVDs still need to be rooted in our resilient alignment, who we are, what we stand for, and why. Because in order for us to make that happen, we also have to evaluate it. We have to reflect on it. We have to write down how that decision made us feel. We have to ensure that those decisions that we're constantly going to be making are aligned with our identity alignment and our transformation and coherence. Because if we continually make those decisions and there's dissonance, distortion, any of that in there, it's going to detract us from actually making those decisions again. It just will. And unfortunately, because we're now stewards of the Resonance Core Framework, all of these tools that we have been talking about the past 15 episodes, and soon to be the book, by the way, where there's even more there, you're going to notice that you have to know all of those things. You have to take all of those chances and that information and root it. You have to make sure it all works. It has to all align, because if it doesn't, it's going to die. It's not sustainable that way. Unfortunately, it's just not. The biggest part that is going to be the biggest detractor against what you want is your mind, because that is the one thing that will literally stop you in your tracks from a neurobiological perspective and a psychological perspective of the activation engine and the threshold and the vast unknown that is literally going to push all those narratives to the forefront saying you can't do it. Sorry, I wish that I could not have to tell you all of this, but unfortunately it's true. Those are the two things that will literally stop you from getting what you want if you give in to them. And it's so hard to have to say that, but it's the truth. We want what we want. We want to get what we want. But in order to make us get there, it's continuously aligned actions, pushing us forward and forward and forward, week by week, month by month, with as much consistency as we can muster. Because then what that does is it brings us into that identity stabilization. Oh, these are the actions that I do. These are the actions that make us who I want to be. They're aligned with who I am. They're calming my nervous system. My mind feels aligned with it and is not firing all of these narratives. I'm recognizing that I'm making goals, that I'm making progress on what I want to do. All of those things have to be done by a small wins focus. Habits that build on top of themselves, so our dopamine continually fires, so that way we are able to make those decisions easier and easier and easier as we move them forward. Before we go to the last break, I do want to also give you just a little bit of a bridge of understanding what you're going to be experiencing with resilient alignment, because now you understand that this is literally what keeps you going. Your resilient alignment is what you need to continually focus on to make all of this a reality, because it won't come in just simply a short period of time. It's a continuous focus, a lifelong focus, in fact. And so what you need to understand is resilient alignment comes from various pieces of information and knowledge that we'll then be getting in the next several episodes, that when you leverage those additional tools, it makes it easier for us to keep the propulsion system going. And so the resilient alignment that we've talked about today then becomes the foundation of additional tools we'll be talking about in the next several episodes. Things like understanding our personal boundaries and our energy wells, understanding feedback and how we can leverage it to better get what we want. Stress interpretation, how we can use it as data to help us ensure that we make those decisions. Watching through feedback loops when we start to understand that our mind is starting to swirl. How do we get it to push it to a data-driven lens, and so on. And then from there, it's pushing it outward, which is the next best part, because we want to make decisions with other people to help us get what we want, to making sure that those decisions land with those people so that we can ensure that our identity transformation keeps going, because we can't do it alone. We have to do it with other people as well. And so you're going to see that over the next several episodes as we start moving forward. You're listening to The Resonant Identity with your host, Terence Waters. We'll be right back. This is The Resonant Identity, and I'm Terence Waters. Welcome back. So we've gone over everything we need to understand about resilient alignment, the specific third core value of the Resonance Core Framework, which is taking our identity, rooting it, and ensuring that we make all of these decisions and MVDs based on our identity alignment and resonance. That is what the resilient alignment piece of the Resonance Core Framework asks us to do, ensuring that our decisions are rooted in our identity alignment. And as we mentioned, all of our processes occur because of action. Today is definitely no different. And because you can now see that we're now shifting into the activation stage of your identity, these next core framework 7-day challenges become crucial because they help you practice all of this. You may have been hearing all of the topics now and being able to understand what they mean, but today's the day that we now start to enact it. Yes, you've been doing your journaling. Yes, you've been doing your identity alignment, identifying who you are, your guardrails, all of those things. But now you're now going to be asked to put a lot of that to the test to see if you actually been doing it, because you have to. These next steps require you to really have a firm grasp on your identity, your value virtue system, your drives, and who you are. There's no way around it at this point. So if you've gotten to this point and you still feel a little rusty, it's okay to go back on past episodes, look at identity challenges and companion articles on the resonantidentity.com. You're welcome to check those out, make notes, print them out, whatever makes sense for you. Because now what's going to happen is we're going to be asking you to action on everything you're learning. And that's where we start today, because we want to ensure that you get what you want. And to make that happen, you need to know your identity and also who you are. So let's get started. So this one is making sure that you keep your identity stabilization moving forward by enacting your drives and pushing forward that dopamine prediction so that way it makes it easier for your brain to process what's happening and making those decisions. And the first one is what is known as your identity anchor. What is your chosen identity for the week? Because again, we won't be able to do every single change in every single week, right? But what is the one thing of your chosen identity that you want to focus on? Again, remembering those small wins, which are just those small microtransactions. We want to do that from that one chosen identity. And then from there, I want you to track any time that you make an MVD aligned with that chosen identity. You need to track your state. Now, what I mean by that is, how do you feel before going into making an MVD? How do you feel? What are your energy? What is going through your mind? How is your mood? How are things going in terms of your narratives and your cues? What is your motivation for that day? Are you feeling like you can make MVD changes? It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to need to make one, but it's important that you understand your state of mind, your state of being, because this more likely changes the outcome of what's going to happen when you enact an MVD. I then want you to take one micro action that starts your activation engine. That is the MVD aligned with your chosen identity and also your value virtue system rooted in resonance and your guardrails, both. Do it once, start that activation. And then once you've done, I want you to continually move it and understand what's happening with that activation. Write it down in your journal, run it through the drive alignment loop. How did it feel? What happened when you started to do this? What were the reflection points that made you feel like you needed to change something? Were your cues and narratives firing? Did you feel a little bit of dissonance from it? What was that dissonance and why? Did it make logical sense in line with what it is you want to become? Does it align with your value virtue system? Did you overstep your guardrails? Things like that. All of that is part of the resonance test and the drive alignment loop, in line with the triad and interpretive hygiene. Write down as many data points as you can think of that relate to that activation, and then start to evaluate it to see if that MVD needs to change. Look at it and say, do I need to make an adjustment here? I noticed that my cues were firing even with this small choice. How can I maybe make it a little bit easier for me to digest? And then I want you to do a propulsion moment, which is choosing one action that felt like identity was pulling you forward, making that decision over and over and over again, that when you enact it, you feel like your identity transformation is moving forward. That can still be an MVD, but if you feel like that there can be something added on top of it to being able to show you that you're making identity transformation points and decisions, add it. As long as it ensures that you stay grounded, you're not overwhelming your system, and has full resilient alignment with your identity, value, virtue system, and the whole shebang. This is why we keep saying it. Who you are, what you stand for, and why. All of those things are your identity. What you believe in, what you've adopted, who you are, who you want to become, what it is you value in life, what's important to you, how you enact your value virtue system, those guardrails you adopt as part of who you are, all of it. All of those things are your resilient alignment in your identity, all of it. And it is continually important that you evaluate it every single day as part of your drive activation system. You have to, because you're then going to see that your identity is going to change. What you valued last week may not be what you valued this week. What you decided to do for your MVD a couple weeks ago now doesn't feel resonant anymore, because we are not stagnant beings. We evolve. Change is imminent with this process. If you continually do all of these things, you're not going to be the same person. I can tell you that right now, because you're then going to start to see that there's change in you and others by the changes and actions you're deciding to make in line with who you want to become. You'll notice that there's just changes of things that you believe in that naturally don't feel resonant anymore. But that's what this decision does. When we talk about identity evolution, identity coherence, identity transformation, that's what we're talking about here. That's why understanding who you want to become is so critical, because these actions will literally make you that person over time if you continually push it forward. I don't know why I keep stressing it so much, but it's just people really need to understand and see. If people really could understand that they have the power to make themselves who they want to become, we would all be doing it. And we would see some amazing changes in this world, because people are just naturally accepting who they are and who they want to become. It's a beautiful thing. And again, you've been given all the tools that you need up to this point to make it happen. Because now what we're going to be learning from here going forward, including with this resilient alignment chapter, you're going to now see how to make it happen, and just adding more and more tools to that basis of what you are. We've given you the basics of the framework. We've given you the steps that you need to make yourself who you want to become. You now know how to make it all happen. And the Resonant Core Framework, which is going to be published in a couple of months, will also give you additional holes of information that still bring in all of these topics we've talked about, but are going to add more context, add even more details regarding what it's rooted in, how you make it happen. You're going to see all of it. But the thing is, you now have the tools, everything, to get what you want, to be who you want to become, to align with who you are. You have it all. You have it all. It just takes you in order to being able to activate it. You need to do that. And if you continually follow all of these processes every single day, it eventually will transform you into who you want to become. I cannot wait to hear of all of your stories. I cannot wait to read about how this has transformed people's lives, how they become much better people. And I really do want to read some of those on the air. So before we close, I just want to invite you that you're more than welcome to check all of this out on theresonantidentity.com. Send us emails at mail@theresonantidentity.com. And you can also engage us on social media, the Facebook group that is available to showing and sharing each other's transformation stories, and information that allows you to see all of this on their social media channels. And with that, we'll give you one final thing from leaving. Embodied awareness and identity transformation are defined based on who you are. Your value virtue system is defining what you stand for and why. But your drives aligned in your resilient alignment are what are going to get you there. Achieving your goals, becoming who you want to become, and becoming literally the best version of yourself to make decisions that land with most people with maximum impact to change the world. Thank you for listening to The Resonant Identity with your host, Terence Waters. If this episode resonated with you, please feel free to review it, subscribe, and like it on your favorite podcast service or YouTube. You can find The Resonant Identity on Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on social media in the show notes and links on theresonantidentity.com. Try this week's 7-day experiment and share about your result when you subscribe or on social media, and your feedback helps shape future episodes. This podcast is governed by FluxLine's terms of use policy, responsible AI usage policy, and others, which can be found in the show notes and on our website at theresonantidentity.com. Have fun, be safe, know who you are and what you stand for, and make choices aligned with your true and chosen identity. Stay safe out there. Goodbye.